Good afternoon. It's my pleasure to present to you the most recent exciting advances in AI-driven human motion capture. Why are we talking about this subject? It is because precision health needs movement and activity analysis. And this is because movement quality or function and physical activity behavior predict disease risk, define outcome, derive mobility biomarkers of disease, are highly personalized, and thus they can be seen alongside the genome, microbiome, and exposome as something that we may call the actome. And my colleague, Dr. Mali Su, and my colleague, Professor Klucken, they have or will later still speak about the role of wearable sensors in this context. And this is why I will speak about video motion capture. Here you can see the classic setup in a human movement analysis laboratory or gait lab. One measures the movement kinematics with so-called marker-based 3D video capture to measure temporal-spatial parameters like joint position and joint angles. For that, one uses 8 to 12 usually high-resolution infrared specialist cameras, and alongside one uses force plates in the ground to measure the ground reaction forces. One can apply electromyography to measure the muscle activity, and through inverse kinematics or musculoskeletal modeling, one can reconstruct the movement. This is the gold standard and continues to be for the next 5 to 10 years, I suppose. This is what it looks like, for instance, such a typical outcome where through a gait cycle, the joint angles are presented left and right in blue and red color, and the gray zone, that's the normal reference. And for instance, for this patient, one can see that the patient has abnormal anterior pelvic tilt, and the clinician can interpret this as a problem that may be related to, for instance, low or back pain or neck pain. Marker-based motion capture is the gold standard technique. It's highly integrated into the other laboratory techniques. There's a huge body of evidence which ensures comparability between the studies. It's considered most accurate and precise, although there may be questions in the future. You can see that it's very elaborate to choose a marker model depending on what joint and movement you want to focus on, and it requires highly trained experts to palpate the correct locations to place these markers, and that means such a test is very time consuming. Only placing the markers can maybe take 40 minutes plus. It requires expert personnel. It is lab bound because of the lighting conditions and the camera positions. It's also an expensive system because all the equipment is highly specialized. The markers themselves, they present a motion impediment, and there is of course skin artifact between the movement of the markers and the underlying bone, and one cannot perform multi-person tests, so interactions between people can hardly be measured. And that means that so far only low patient numbers could be studied for research or in very specialist clinical studies, but not large trials. Because of the environment, it's biased by this artificial situation, and it's less suitable for children with a short attention span or geriatric patients with cognitive impairments to explain them what happens with the marker placements and what to perform. So this is why this has been largely a research tool and not yet a large volume big data tool. But there are advances, thankfully, recently. And this is markerless motion capture. So we can do away with these markers. It has been tried since a long time using, I would say, more classic statistical methods and image manipulation, like visual Hull construction, iterative closest point algorithms, and it often requires an a priori model. But now the new techniques, they benefit from the advances in convolutional neural networks, and they have been trained in some cases on ground truth labeled images where there are more than 500,000 ground truth images available. At the same time, the cameras, they only need to be a quality red, green, blue RGB camera. One still needs multi-camera systems, 6 to 10 similar to before. In most cases, the cameras still need to be time syncable. And that brings many advantages with it. So there is no marker setup. People can wear their own clothes. There's no preparation required. It can be performed in any environment, including outdoor. So there is no artificial environment biasing the movements. Any movement can be measured, not only specifically trained movements. Multi-person assessment is possible, and it can be done in real-time to minute processing. And these aspects altogether really revolutionize the opportunities that motion capture can perform in the clinic. It now allows a high patient throughput. Instead of 1 to 2 hours per measurement, in theory, it can be done in real time in a minute. That means it can be done as a routine assessment, and big data can be generated. It means that patients behave normal because they don't have to wear the markers and be measured in an artificial environment. It allows pediatric and geriatric patients to be considered, and it enables a totally new clinical workflow. In theory, such a camera system can be installed in a patient consultation room, and a doctor can operate it, as there's no technical specialization required to run this. But there are disadvantages. It remains, or it is actually a black box artificial intelligence model. There are only proprietary commercial models available, so one cannot look inside. There are very few, and I think most of them here, validation status available, and it's still computationally quite intense. So one needs a higher NPC and a graphics card to run it. Here you can see some examples: multi-person motion capture, dynamic or unusual movement motion capture, and baby motion capture outdoor application. So a lot is possible with this system that wasn't possible before. And there are some validation data available already. This is comparing temporal spatial parameters of gait to a marker-based system and the so-called gait right met, which is accepted in the community also. And one can see that with a markerless system, gait speed, stance time, stride length, they are well within acceptable limits. This is another validity study comparing gait kinematics between markerless and marker-based, and the joint position left, the difference in centimeters between the different joints is well within acceptable limits of plus minus 1-2 centimeters, and also the joint angles work very well. In fact, what you can see is that the variability with the markerless system is especially less when it comes to the hip movement, and that may be related to the large skin artifact that the markers have. So maybe here markerless may be the better solution. Another study compares the variability in a trial and in between different sessions. And what can be seen that while the variability in a trial is still a little bit higher for markerless systems between different sessions, so emulating a longitudinal follow-up. Actually, the variability is less because it's not required to place the marker. So here you can see that there is variability between sessions when markers are placed differently, which they usually are. This is for another movement, so a jump, and also here you can see when you go from squat, toe off, and landing, that the markerless system nicely tracks, for instance, the knee flexion. But in the knee varus angle, it seems like that actually the marker-based system is not working so well, and the authors also blame this on the skin artifact. So again, maybe markerless could maybe even be better in some situations. And now we go to the next generation possibility to capture human motion via so-called monocular pose estimation. Monocular means single camera. And how does it work? It works with pre-trained deep learning models that are provided by AI solution providers, and everybody's involved: Google, Meta, Amazon, Azure. And they have models openly available like PostNet, OpenPost, DensePost, etc. It's all based on the great advances in computer vision and object detection in the context of autonomous cars or the game and movie animation. It only requires a single RGB commodity camera, so it can be any cheap camera. It's camera agnostic, and while it records 2D, the AI translates into 3D. You can use any viewing angle. Occlusions and truncations are allowed. It's real time. It allows face tracking. It also allows multiple person. It's open source in many cases to continue development on pre-trained models. One can apply privacy by design options. One can calculate on board versus the cloud and only store the coordinates of the stick figure. And to run the model, not to train the model, the computational demands are low. So it sounds incredible, and it is quite miraculous if you see what's possible. But of course, it lacks still biomechanical validity. It still has rather low resolution and frequency, and therefore currently still less accurate and precise, but it exponentially develops. It's a black box, and there are no ready-made solutions available for users. Here are some examples that you can see how well this works. From a 2D image to go into a 3D pose estimation, like here on the volleyball field, or there's also one commercial application that's already a medical device approved, where it runs on the mobile phone to perform a fall risk analysis. This is a validity study I found where the error is calculated as the Euclidean distance between the estimated and the ground truth. The ground truth is available from a 3.6 million labeled database available open source. And you can see that in the monocular case, the accuracy is around 4 centimeters. If you use 2 cameras, it's below 2 centimeters. So I think this is already useful in certain cases, and will probably improve in the future. While pose estimation maybe is not as accurate yet as multi-camera motion tracking, it allows us, via its simplicity and low cost, other applications like activity monitoring applications at home or by the person himself. So one could imagine monitoring a space for falling, for instance, in a hospital, or exercise counter and tracking correct execution of physiotherapy exercises, or monitor a sports field and document the activities on the pitch. So in overview, We have the marker-based system as the gold standard, the markerless as an emerging technique which can take us from the lab into routine clinical application, and then the next gen, the monocular pose estimation, which may take the camera also into activity monitoring applications. Thank you for your attention.